Today with Claire Byrne on RTE Radio 1.
The High Court is due to decide whether hare coursing should continue during the current coronavirus restrictions. Coursing, which involves hares being chased by greyhounds, is suspended since Christmas Eve, but those who are involved claim it's an elite sport and so it should be allowed to operate during the lockdown. Now, opponents of the controversial sport insist the current suspension should become permanent. Well, our reporter Barry Lenihan has more now. And Barry, it's often around this time of year that there's some debate around the future of hare coursing.
As it's usually around now, the countdown is on to the Sports All-Ireland final, Claire, the National Hare Coursing Festival in Clonmel on the first weekend in February, an event which often attracts protests from animal rights campaigners over the treatment of the protected species, the Irish hare. However, the festival's 96th year hangs at the balance. Coursing events, they were allowed to take place in the run-up to Christmas. That's because on December 1st, they were included on a government list of so-called elite sports, alongside inter-county GAA, professional sports and horse and greyhound racing. But in an updated list on Christmas Eve, after a fresh round of coronavirus restrictions, coursing was the only sport delisted, no longer elite, and so all coursing events had to be cancelled. The Irish Coursing Club, or ICC, the sports regulatory body, it claims the delisting happened without explanation, notice or consultation.
And so, Barry, what's happening now?
Earlier this week, the ICC brought a High Court challenge against the government's decision to omit it from the list of elite sports. The body said while it was delisted, its sister sport, greyhound racing and equine activities, they were allowed to continue. The ICC says coursing's exclusion is flawed on the basis that Health Minister Stephen Donnelly decided to delist coursing without consulting the line departments for the sport, agriculture and housing plus heritage. It also claimed the exclusion is tainted by a perception of bias, as Minister Donnelly had in 2015, as a Social Democrat, voted for legislation banning hare coursing. Now, the court granted the ICC leave for a judicial review, with a decision due later today or early next week on whether the remainder of the coursing season can take place.
So, Barry, you've been talking to people in the hare coursing community. What are they saying to you about the suspension?
They claim it's yet another attack on what they say is an ancient rural tradition, after the government ordered a truncated season last year due to a COVID-19 equivalent among rabbits and hares. An online fundraiser by coursing figures to, quote, save our sport has raised almost €200,000 in the last 4 days alone. Now, some I've heard are privately happy the sport is off due to rising coronavirus cases, but others have fears around breeding and a rise in illegal coursing. James O'Connor is involved in hare coursing in Kerry.
Look, the desire to go coursing runs very deep in people, and it's hard to put a measure on the impact it would have, when their sport is taken away as it is now. Our lives revolve around coursing. It creates uncertainty, Barry, for breeding going forward. If you come down around the rural areas, down Tipperary, Limerick, Kerry, down West Cork as well, the breeding is again, it's part of the family culture. They'll breed one bitch and they'll have their couple of pups to look forward to. In coursing, you're not breeding really to make money. You're breeding to keep the sport alive. For you, what's the impact on the hare population for not having the sport going ahead? Hares are revered by the coursing clubs, Barry. Over 99% of hares captured are returned to the wild after every meeting into club preserves. Look, they're going back in better shape than they came in. The big threat for the hare, Barry, in this is illegal poaching. When the hares are released out to the wild, illegal hare coursing is rife. The dogs, we were on about breeding, the dogs in illegal coursing, poaching, they're bred specifically, they're crossbreds, they're called lurchers. They're bred with the intention of being well equipped to wear down a hare out in the wild. This is a big problem. Look, this is the real threat to the hare and to coursing, Barry. Coursing clubs, Barry, are the hare's greatest ally, Barry. And hare coursing was regarded with inter-county GAA, with professional sports, as being an elite sport. There are some who would say watching a dog turn a hare isn't too elite. It's the lack of understanding that creates the problems when it comes to hare coursing. If you unjustly take away something from ordinary decent people based entirely on ignorance or prejudice, you'll do a huge amount of damage to them people psychologically and mentally, Barry. At the moment the racing is going ahead, greyhound tracks are going ahead, we feel that coursing should be on a level footing with those sports. We were on that list previously, we were taken off the list, and it's clarification we're looking for, Barry, at this stage as to why we're not still on that list of elite sport.
So that's James O'Connor, Barry. On the other side of this, the animal rights campaigners, they've long been calling for the outright ban of hair coursing. So what are they saying about the current developments?
Yeah, and just last month, the former Baywatch star Pamela Anderson urged the Taoiseach to ban hair coursing, telling Micheál Martin in a letter how the sport was cruel and reckless and at odds with what she said was the warmth and goodwill associated with Ireland. Aideen Urell, she's the campaign director for the Irish Council Against Blood Sports. She says all hares captured recently for the now cancelled meetings must be released back into the wild.
Well, this is very good news for the hares. It's a temporary respite for our persecuted hares. We can only hope that the hares in captivity in coursing compounds are now going to be released back into the wild. We're calling for an immediate release of all the hares currently held. They were very reluctant last time it was locked down to release the hares. They didn't want to release them, but I do hope that in the event that they did release them at that time, and I hope they're all released by now, the ones this time.
In relation to those involved in coursing, there are fundraising initiatives underway at present upon which you are making a complaint.
They set up a fundraising thing under GoFundMe. Under the terms and conditions of GoFundMe, the platform is not to be used to raise funds involving gambling, gaming, horse racing, greyhound racing. And quite clearly, hare coursing is a gambling activity. It's based on gambling on the outcome of two dogs chasing a hare. We have made a complaint to them and we have brought it to their attention, and I believe they're investigating it.
You say that this is a so-called temporary respite for the persecution of hares, but those involved in coursing would argue that the clubs have a responsibility for taking care of the hare population, and without them the population will probably decline.
Oh, not so. Taking hares from the wild and using them as live bait for greyhounds at coursing meeting is hardly good for hares. This should have been banned long since. It has been banned in England.
But in England there are problems of illegal hunting of hares. Are you not driving illegal coursing by your calls and your demands here?
If you were to follow that to its logical conclusion, we shouldn't have banned badger baiting. We shouldn't have banned cockfighting, bear baiting, all of these things. They could all take place underground. That's not the issue. Really, hare coursing needs to be outlawed. And if it does take place illegally and underground, then it can be investigated and those taking part can be prosecuted.
Aideen Urell there. And Barry, politically then, what has been the reaction to the delisting of hare coursing as an elite sport?
Well, the Dáil is due to vote in the coming months on whether to turn this current suspension of the sport into a permanent ban. Rise TD Paul Murphy.
I welcomed the fact that hare coursing was no longer being considered an elite sport. I welcomed it for two reasons. One, because of coronavirus and because of the spread of coronavirus. It means that we won't have these events taking place. And the second reason I welcomed it is because it means that thousands of hares will not be, unnecessarily and gratuitously terrorised.
Is that really the case, though? Because those involved in the sport and others would argue that nobody's interested in killing hares. It's the objective, of course, of the sport is to turn the hare.
Truth is that we know, these are the figures from the official bodies, that over the past 4 seasons, 75 hares have been killed, despite the muzzles and so on that exist. And then much wider than that is just the sheer terror of these peaceful, lovely animals of hares being chased by dogs. I mean, there is something very brutal and barbaric about it. And
part of our heritage, say some.
That's what they try to say, but actually this is part of a British aristocratic heritage. It isn't something that is kind of native to Ireland for what that's worth. But I just think fundamentally that we shouldn't be promoting this kind of barbaric treatment of animals.
There are moves afoot in the Dáil in relation to the future of hare coursing.
Yeah, so I introduced a bill before Christmas to ban hare coursing. I'd be hopeful that we will have time before the summer break to debate that at second stage. At the moment, we have a big problem because the Green Party, has a clear party policy of saying they're against hare coursing, and yet they are saying clearly that they would oppose my bill to ban hare coursing and vote in favour of hare coursing. And for the moment, Sinn Féin also has a position of being in favour of hare coursing, which I think is contrary to a lot of their members, their base, their supporters. And so we also have a campaign to get Sinn Féin to change their position on that. So we need to win those two things in order to then pass the bill.
But independent Tipperary TD Matty McGrath, a coursing enthusiast, he's to raise recent events in the Dáil next week.
Well, I suppose the country people in Ireland and indeed the coursing people didn't expect a lot from Taoiseach Micheál Martin, but they didn't expect to get this savage attack on them, a discriminatory attack on them on Christmas Eve. And this to be pulled so unceremoniously without warning, really taking away from the elite sport of horse racing and greyhound racing and single out coursing for this treatment. It was really putting the bloodhounds after the industry. It's shocking. It really we have to ask questions. Does Micheál Martin care about rural Ireland, the Taoiseach?
Well, the Taoiseach would argue he cares very much about rural Ireland. What do you think the motivation really is here, Matty?
Well, I think he's been hijacked by the Greens. He's obviously in a very difficult position. The Greens had refused, or some of them had refused to vote for the CETA deal in late December there. And I think this was an effort and a sneaky deal done, grubby deal done by Eamon Ryan and himself to get the Greens to back the CETA deal in the new year and sacrifice the coursing.
I'm sure the government would refute the allegations that you've put forth. Is this really a battle worth fighting, Matty? We had almost 8,000 cases on Wednesday, a record figure in hospitals due to COVID-19. Is it really safe to be holding hare coursing meetings in the current environment?
This distasteful battle is going on, and the undermining of this industry is going on, as I said, since Greens were last in government back in 2007 to 11. No point in confusing or conflating the issue now with COVID. You couldn't have a more healthier pursuit than being out around 20-acre, 100-acre field, out at Muffween Spear, as it were, hunting these dogs. And remember, these dogs are very well cared for.
75 hares killed over the last 4 seasons. That's what opponents say.
Clonmel meets have very, very few hares killed. So killing and fishing and shooting since our Lord's time. I know that some people don't like God anymore either, but this is a battle well worth fighting for. And the coursing people and us as rural independent TDs are going to fight it as well.
So Barry, what about the government parties? What are they telling you about the current situation for hare coursing?
Well, rural Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael TDs say they've been getting it in the neck. One Fine Gael deputy told me he received 12 angry phone calls on Christmas Day and 20 on St Stephen's Day from a furious coursing following. Fine Gael Kerry TD Brendan Griffin, he says the recent decision should be reversed and coursing allowed continue. Now, the Green Party wants an outright ban on coursing, but it's not in the programme for government, and so party figures say they can't vote for any ban. However, the Junior Minister for Heritage, the Green Party's Malcolm Noonan, he has direct responsibility for hare coursing, and he's told me this morning that he's to commission a special report on the future of coursing and its viability. Officially, the Department of Housing and Heritage says this morning it was aware of the exclusion on coursing from the list of elite sports on December 24th, that the ICC confirmed the exclusion in writing before Christmas, but it also points out that coursing had been excluded under earlier level 5 restrictions.
Barry Lenihan, thank you very much indeed. Let's go to the newsroom now and to Vivian Traynor.